Oh.
Good day.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. I was expecting a webinar format.
It will be. It will be. Um, just usually Tammy hosts, but she's out today, so I'm here.
And you'll be running this.
Well, I'm gonna introduce whoever is speaking. I don't even know. I think it's Caitlin who's speaking.
Okay,
It's a lunch and learn format, so there is a speaker. We just introduce them. They do their thing. We're in the background.
right.
Where are you located?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Nice. See how many people RSVP'd.
Yeah.
Hi, Caitlin. You're muted.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Um, Tammy is out, so I am hosting for you. We'll wait. We usually wait till like 4 or 5 minutes after just to give people time to join, and then I'll turn it over to you. By the way, if you can email me the slides, I don't know if you send it to Tammy like that, we can post it.
Absolutely. I'll do that right now.
Thank you. I used to do this all the time. Tammy handles this now, so you get me today.
I love that. Thank you for helping out and for hosting with me.
Of course, of course.
Perfect. I went
Well,
ahead.
welcome everyone. We're gonna give it a couple of more minutes, and then start. I assume you have my email, right?
I do. Yes, I've already sent it over.
Awesome. Yes, got it.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I'm going to test sharing my screen.
Yeah.
All right, and I will have to reopen, so I'll be right back into Zoom so that I can screen share.
Oh no.
I'll be
Okay.
right back.
No worries. Don't we love the joys of technology?
When it works, it's great.
Yeah, when it works. And then when it doesn't, it takes more time than those rabbit holes are deadly.
That's when you want to be the guy that solves those solutions.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
All right, Caitlin will be right, and then we'll give it another 2-3 minutes. You're back.
I am. That wasn't too bad, huh?
Yeah. You would think Zoom would have figured out how to, like, when you log in, to make sure all the permissions are there, right? So you don't have to do everything.
I know. Yeah, I just got a new computer not long ago, so I think that's part of why as I use more systems, I realize what else is
Yeah.
missing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll just give it another minute or two. You had a nice amount of registrations and not everyone's here yet, so
No worries. Felix from my team should be joining us soon as well.
okay.
Yeah, I just joined. Good morning, everybody.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
All right, we'll give it one more minute, and then anyone else who comes, and as always, we will post the recording and the slides afterwards. Caitlin, where are you calling in from?
I am in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. What about you?
In New York.
Oh, okay. Is it snowing up there?
It was earlier this week. I don't know today. I haven't checked yet.
It's snowing again here. So this is
Oh
our,
no.
yeah, like fifth or fourth snow day of the year, which is,
Oh,
if you have young children, then you're over it.
yeah. No, we don't have. Oh, yuck. There will be snow today at some point. Of course, I have to go into the city today, so that is not fun.
Just to add.
Yeah, just to add. All right, why don't we get started? Thank you everyone for joining us. You usually get Tammy. Today you get me because she's on vacation. Love having you all here and excited to introduce Caitlin, um, who will be taking us through an important topic. So Caitlin, over to you.
Thank you. So, hi, good morning or afternoon for some of you. I'm Caitlin Sines. I'm with CoverHound. We are partnering with Fractionals United. I met you guys through Katie. I don't know if you, Katie Walter. I really enjoy her. We partnered with her and worked with her for a while, and she introduced me to your wonderful community. And thinking about what you guys need from an insurance standpoint, we put together just some tips and things to think about to just help you manage your risk, take care of your clients, and protect yourselves all together. So I will go ahead and share my screen and we will jump in. All right. So stepping out as a solopreneur, insurance essentials for fractional leaders. So I myself, again, Caitlin Sines, we have Felix on here as well. Felix is my VP of sales. And so as we go through, we'll allow space for questions, conversation, and all of that good stuff. So please, we love interaction. So why fractional leadership? Would anyone want to share why they became a fractional leader? Like what motivated you? What drove you? Any brave souls want to talk about that? No, that's okay.
If
Oh, go
no
ahead.
one else will, I will chime in.
Thank you.
Sure. Originally, I fell into it by mistake, but it's a combination of things, including, we are treated more as equal partners as opposed to employees, ability to do more than one thing, have more say in your life, and I can keep going, so I won't.
The
No,
other
I
thing
think
I would add would be just maximizing impact. I felt like I could have much more impact across many smaller to medium-sized companies than maybe the larger enterprise companies I have been with.
really good points and perspectives. And I do agree having the spread impact and being able to kind of go in between different places and be used like to the best of your abilities. I think that's awesome. What I hear when I talk to some fractionals is more time with family, flexible lifestyle. A lot of times there can be like a different monetary gain by being able to be useful to more than one spot. And then sometimes a combination of these factors. And I'll try to keep an eye on chat. I do see some chats coming in. So I'll kind of go through and just be sure to check those as we go. But if you do have questions, please speak up. This is a conversation. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, as I think that, as we think in terms of expanding and being able to reach more people, being able to talk to more people, a lot of times it can feel like that double responsibility. You're responsible for a lot more now versus just one piece in some cases or one company. And in that, doubling that responsibility, you've really also doubled your risk exposure. So as fractionals, a lot of your risk is going to come down to the advice that you give and the expertise that now you're sharing across these multiple avenues. And when you're doing that in, one location as a W-2 employee, at the end of the day, you're making decisions on behalf of the business, and there is a sense of responsibility and respect that that's where you're put in that position for. Oftentimes, as we move into fractional, the risk exposure is to come in and say, you gave advice, maybe they didn't follow it all the way, maybe it was well intended and it didn't work out as anticipated. And ultimately, that company, went on your advice and then possibly got a financial loss due to that. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about. What I'm essentially saying is we're talking about professional liability, errors and omissions, all that good stuff. Does that all sound familiar? Does anyone here not know what professional liability, E&O, all that is? Because if so, we need to have a whole separate conversation after this phone call. Perfect. Love that. So let's talk about what that means and ultimately how insurance can help. So again, as a fractional leader working for multiple people, you really don't have the protection of the company you work for because you're technically a contractor of the various companies in most cases. You might be W-2 in some, but at the end of the day, from what I understand about most of the fractionals I know, which is a handful, that's not usually the route you go because you want to be able to give advice as needed and to be able to multiply the way in which you're able to add value to multiple people. But you are the company now. So in stepping out and becoming that solopreneur, ultimately, whatever that consulting name is essentially the company. And so every company you've ever worked for has had insurance, but I do have a big question. Does everyone on this call have insurance? I'm seeing heads nod. I love that. So good. You're already above what I hear sometimes, right? It sounds like a lot of people here are probably experienced. You've had multiple clients. You've got a revenue share that you feel you need to protect. And I think that's amazing. Because at the end of the day, the risk that your former employees assumed is now up to you. And that's what we're here for, is to make sure that you're thinking about the risk holistically. And so again, we talk a lot about professional liability, E&O, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. But the reality is, depending on who you work for, how you work, what systems you're using, you might be underinsured still to this day. So I'm going to take a quick break and check these chats real quick. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Good. Oh, perfect. Good. Wanted to work part-time. Yep, I'm seeing some quotes in there about why flexibility, having different experiences. Great. So now let's talk about what the full risk is. So here's the things that you do and essentially the responsibilities that could result in lawsuit. So you give advice and counsel, provide strategic insights, store confidential information. You're an integral part of the company, even if you're not necessarily W-2. And at the end of the day, if clients are visiting you and you're either renting out space or having them in your home, all of those things are exposure. And so again, I'm guessing that most of you have a professional liability policy. Does anyone here have a general liability policy? I'm seeing some more chats. Bob, we got you. Reach out. Yep, we can do that, Tom. I got your note. Okay. So for general liability, if you're going to have people coming to your site, if you're seeing clients, if you're renting spaces, essentially that's broadening your exposure. Like professional liability is only protecting you for the advice that you're giving. It's not protecting you for people visiting your home, visiting a site, having in-person meetings, and any injuries that could occur because of that. The storing confidential information, I want to take a minute to talk about as well. Who here has a cyber policy or has heard of one? I see a couple hands. Good. Yes. What do you guys need me for? Perfect. You're using Hartford. Good, good. Heard, don't have. Okay, Tom, we talked through that. So a lot of you have heard of one, but don't necessarily have one. This is really common in fractional consulting, IT consulting, business consulting in general. So cyber insurance essentially is covering you for cyber attacks. And so if you're storing confidential information, if you are getting information, you're having to download documents to review and help make decisions on, if you are storing that, if you're being emailed this information, at the end of the day, when that information gets to your hands, to your cloud, to your computer, you are responsible for that. And so if you were to say, be working from a cafe, you leave your computer behind, something happens, that information is taken and then it essentially leaked, it is your fault that that company's confidential information was leaked. Let's say that, that's an extreme case. Let's just say that you were hacked. You were reading some news articles about the Super Bowl yesterday and clicked something that you didn't realize was a little sketchy. Now there's malware on your computer and information's also being taken. Anything that has been stored on your computer that is essentially confidential and important to that company, if it were to be leaked, that is your responsibility. And so that's where cyber comes in and protects you. In addition to that, let's say your computer is hacked and held for ransom. Sounds like something out of a movie. It absolutely happens. And for the most part, small businesses, solopreneurs, people without a lot of infrastructure are more likely to be targeted than, say, a Target or someone big, because it's easier to hack. They take your computer. They essentially say, we're not going to unlock your computer screen until you pay us X amount of money, 20,000, 30,000, whatever. Cyber insurance is going to come in and help negotiate with the hackers, pay ransom fees, help with data cleanup, help understand like what files were touched, help you notify your clients because there's a fiduciary duty to do so. And in some states like New York, there's legal responsibilities for notifying people if their data was compromised. And so for the cost of a cyber policy, which Felix is much more equipped to tell you, he touches these policies all the time and what the cost would be, huge benefit. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but that's what I see the most. And when we're talking to clients, like we have other partners, people are literally calling us saying like, how does this work? I've had a breach. We also work with booksellers. We have consistently small booksellers selling out of their homes, reaching out and saying things like this. So we're seeing more and more of it. And I want to make sure you all are aware. If you have questions about those specifics, please reach out. But as we look through these potential risks, that is the one that is most overlooked in your industry, and that at this point is most taken advantage of as well from bad actors, as we like to call them. So questions about risk, or have you guys, I love this part, have you guys experienced any other risk or things that I haven't like touched on? Has anything happened that you're like, this happened to me, and either A, I wish I had insurance, or B, I'm so glad I did? Any good gotcha stories, claim stories? No? All right. So let me go back to Tom's question. I want to make sure I address all these. So E&O indemnity versus general liability. So in this case, do we need both? And if different for consulting versus fractionals when we break them out? So a general liability policy is essentially covering you if someone comes on your property, if it's not necessarily covering you for the advice that you're giving. It's literally covering you for materials. If you've got computers, like small things like that, it's not going to cover like heavy machinery. There's going to be limits to that. But at the end of the day, it's the basic policy that like most people are getting if they're working from home. For an E&O, errors and omissions, that is specifically covering if you give advice that has caused someone financial hardship. So if you've given poor advice, if they perceived that the advice you were given was necessarily did not benefit them and decide that you are the reason for their financial impact, that's what E&O is covering. E&O, professional liability, all of that goes back to kind of the words and advice that you're giving, writing about, et cetera. General liability is more so for injuries, liability stemming from other than advice you're given. And so Whether or not you need both can be very specific. I think that everyone here, if you're again giving advice, you 100% need a professional liability policy, errors and omissions policy. For the general liability policy, it's really going to come down to like, where are you working out of? How much equipment do you have? Are you looking to have that protected? Like more along those lines. Felix, is there anything else that you'd like to add or chat about for that piece?
Adding to the chat a couple of the questions, but no, you basically covered everything in a nutshell. So general liability is going to be physical risks like injuries or damages to a third party. Errors and omissions is for your services that you're offering. So if you make a mistake, cause a financial hardship, just like you said, bad advice, they're unhappy, they feel like they've lost, thousands of dollars or millions of dollars based on your advice, they can come after you. So the E&O will provide basically an attorney on retainer. It'll provide the defense costs. It's going to provide any settlement fees that are associated with that if you're found to be liable. And then cyber is going to be all your digital risks. So if you're working on a computer, as you know, there's a lot of data that you're going to have in there and a lot of back and forth during that time. If that gets intercepted or if it gets locked out by a hacker, they're going to want some either monetary money, some Bitcoin, whatever it might be. The insurance carrier, if you have a cyber policy, would then negotiate with those people on your behalf, get them paid, get your info back if it's encrypted or if it's taken for whatever reason. And then they also clean up your system. So they don't just leave it at that. They will have a IT forensics person come in, check your servers or your computer, your laptop, make sure there's no more malware or viruses so they go back to work in a safe environment.
Yeah. And Danielle, I think the basics for if you were brand new entering this and you're saying like, I know I need insurance, what do I need? E&O and cyber are like the absolute basics. Once you start getting contracts, they may require more. They may require higher limits. And I saw, do you need both errors and omission and professional liability? We kind of use them interchangeably. So you wouldn't necessarily need both. There are times you need different financial lines protections, like directors and officers versus professional liability, but errors and omissions and professional liability are very much interchangeably like same language. Each policy is going to be a little different. Like most carriers try to have a competitive advantage that they offer you. So the policies themselves won't mirror, but that can be very specific to your needs. And again, they're covering the same basics of like what you're telling people. Will I need E&O if I have coverage under my client's D&O? At the end of the day, like the client's D&O, like that ultimately is there to protect them. So if you can be held responsible for something and they can point that finger, then at the end of the day, I think it's best for you to have your own E&O policy. And to answer another question in terms about like revenue and things like that, let me go back. So is there a minimum or size revenue? It kind of varies. Like we're always going to ask as an insurance person, like, what is your revenue? But at the same time, you have to think about the portfolio that you're managing for your clients. So if you're giving advice on something and it could cost them $20 million, then technically they can come sue you for 20 million, right? That's where it goes back to like contractually, if you're working with someone, they're probably going to require certain amounts to make sure that their interests are protected. But for you, you're going to want to ask yourself, like, what is my revenue? What am I trying to protect myself for? But also, what is my exposure through the advice I'm giving someone else? So if you're working with, again, big clients and you're advising on things that could cost, several millions of dollars, if you were to be held liable for that, you have to ask yourself, like, could I pay them back for that? Could I make them whole? If the answer is no, we might want to have a conversation about what limits make sense for you. So if you're using client equipment in their software, is cyber necessary? Still, yes, cyber is protecting if it's your fault something happened. So I think that's really helpful that you're using their equipment, and they might have stop gaps. They might not allow you to visit certain websites. But if you do something that causes harm, if your behavior, your lack of following their etiquette, like you go on Facebook or something when their policy says you shouldn't from the computer, and as a result, there's an infiltration, like it's essentially still your responsibility. Now, sometimes you might have contracts that it's like they're assuming cyber risk because of X, Y, and Z. I think waivers, as you all probably know, are very good ways to help protect yourselves. And that's certainly more of legal advice you'd want to seek. But at the end of the day, if you could be held liable for something, if you could be deemed at fault for financial loss, that's what the policy itself is protecting. And I think if you keep that in mind, it's really easy to make decisions on like where your exposures are and where you need help the most. And we can certainly have that conversation. At CoverHound, we are all about keeping your, like, we like to think about insurance as an asset versus a liability. And with any good asset, you don't necessarily want to be overinsured or underinsured. You want to be adequately insured for what your risk is so you can keep money in your business. And that's something that, you know, we try to keep in mind as we're consulting you guys. Let's see. All right. It looks like I think most of our questions are answered. I think Felix got most of them. Have I missed any questions? Felix, have I missed anything?
Not necessarily. I think somebody asked that if they work remotely from home, then they wouldn't need general liability. Your risk is very low. So technically, everybody that is offering a service or a product should have general liability because there's a coverage called advertising injury and defamation that comes included in that general liability. So an example would be if a business accuses you of libel, slander, or even copyright infringement. For example, you write a blog or some social media post that hurts another company, they could come after you for that, and the general liability can cover that under that coverage that's included. So it's a yes and a no. I mean, it just depends on your exposure. If you're writing blogs or any type of content or advertising or posting on social media about a third party competitor, you should probably look into it. But if you're never going to see your clients in person, they're never going to come to your home, then yes, technically you wouldn't necessarily need that coverage. It just depends on your situation and the extent of the work that you do.
Insurance is a lot of yes, but.
Yeah.
Yes, but just to cover our bases. I see Judith's question, have a separate network systems. So yes, and cyber insurance would cover both. Cyber insurance is for small business. You can get personal cyber insurance. We don't necessarily sell that. But if you were on a personal network or you're on a work network, the network that you're on is both are protected. But again, we're talking about cyber's covering if like one of your clients happened. Let's say that you're on your home network and your home banking information was taken and your home computer was locked and hacked and whatnot. It would not be covering for that, but it would be covering if one of your clients, some of your clients' information was vulnerable within that same hack. So it doesn't necessarily matter the network. It just matters like what is the implication that has happened? Like who's impacted by it? Is it you personally? Because these cyber policies that we sell would not cover that. But you can look at personal cyber insurance, and that would be kind of like LifeLock comes to mind. Some other things like that. All right, let me see. Multiple small businesses and their E&O policies will cover more. Company, would it require a holding company? Felix, I'll toss that one to you. Do you know?
All right, so I'm reading the chat here. Which one are we covering at this point? I was replying to Cindy.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, what was the direct question? That you want me to?
Yeah, if we have multiple small businesses, are there E&O
Mhm.
policies that will cover more than one company, or would it require a holding company? I think that's going to be carrier specific, but Felix he writes
Yes.
the policies all day.
Yeah, so it is carrier specific. So some carriers will allow you to add your additional small businesses as additional name insured if the services are the similar or the same. So if you're providing consulting services or you're providing a similar service just under a different business name or EIN number, then yes, you can put them all together. But if you're providing, let's just say, just for example, you're providing tax services and then you're providing insurance services. Those are two kind of similar. You're both working on a computer, but they're completely different services. So in that case, you would want to get a policy for each business. So it just depends on if you're going to be offering the same services or not under that umbrella of companies. And then you can add additional named insureds to the policy. Otherwise, the best practice is to just insure them separately.
And Felix, just to touch,
Mhm.
this is Lee Meyer, to touch on the holding company as well. If there is a
Mhm.
holding company with different entity types, different business types under it,
Mhm.
in is there any point in getting insurance at the holding company level, or does it really need to be specific to the business itself? And this is with the assumption
That,
that they're
yeah.
very different businesses.
Yeah, the best practice is to ensure the services that
At
you're
the business
providing.
level.
So yeah, at the business level, yes, because the holding company is good for tax purposes and to, account for all the services that you're doing under that umbrella. But for the services you're actually offering to be covered properly, you would want to do it at the business level.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Great questions.
Mm.
All right. So I am recommending cybersecurity, even if you're given access to a client's network on your own computer, because if your action causes that client's network to be breached, that's your fault. And therefore you would be held responsible. They would hold you responsible for that. Now you might again be able to negotiate being added, as an additional insured on their policy, depending on, their size. They might be requiring you to have your own, but traditionally speaking, even if you're on their network, if it's your fault and you're not a W-2 employee, you could be held liable for that breach. What factors influence premium and cost specifically for E&O? It's really going to be like revenue is a big one, and like risk exposure, which makes the most sense. The carriers, are they covering you for 1 million or 10 million? There's going to be a very different, cost associated with that. The other is what kind of advice you're giving. There are certain things that are more risky to be advising on than others. And so that's certainly taken into consideration. It goes back to kind of the holdings company question and the different entities. So in general, there are some industries that like people really don't like to insure as well. And so it might have to go to a non-admitted market and be more expensive, which is really all that means. Or they feel like if you're an IT consultant, they kind of know what you're most likely consulting on. When AI first started coming out, that was a big thing. People were popping up as consultants, and there was really no known way to understand the risk. And so sometimes if it's a new industry you're consulting with, they might be charging more, but those are a few things that are kind of going into the pricing of it. All right. For nonprofits, we can certainly have that conversation as well. Maybe we can talk offline, Tara, but happy to help give advice for that. We do have some experience there as well. So I think with a contracts are good. A lot of underwriting questions might ask, like, do you have a contract, and what contract necessarily is in place? Does it necessarily help reduce the risk? It really depends. Like at the end of the day, depending on what you're advising on, what you're outlining in the contract, like it all comes back to like, can you be held liable for something? And even with like a waiver or some kind of contract in place, if you've caused financial hardship, sometimes even going to court and presenting your waiver and saying like, see, I've had them sign this, can be very costly. And so insurance would cover you for that as well. They would essentially be sending the lawyers on your behalf minus your deductible. And so I think that that's something else to consider. Even the best laid waivers can sometimes, you still have to go to court and defend the fact that you shouldn't be in court. So great questions. All right. So small businesses need protection too. A lot of this we've kind of covered, but and we've already talked through in some of your questions, and I'll kind of keep the chat up so I can keep monitoring that. But a big fact here that I want to make sure we talk about is really 23% of small business owners don't have any insurance, and 90% aren't clear on what insurance they need. I think this is really important because as we're learning here, there's a lot of things you might dabble in, especially as a small business or solopreneur. If you're starting out, you're trying to figure out most likely like where can you make income, right? Like this is the advice I give, what market is best served for that. I'm guessing that might have changed for some of you. Some of you may have started in one segment talking about one thing and kind of grown as your market responded and your leads started coming in, or your prospects, right? And so insurance is an evolving piece, just like, as you look at your assets at the end of the year and you file your taxes, because like we're all there, right? You're asking yourself, like, how did I perform? And is it on track with like what I expected, how much I paid in taxes, and really like what your insurance exposure is. So as things grow, to Felix's point, as you start talking about different things, if you start off in IT and now you're into accounting, and now you found yourself in a very niche world of kind of CFO fractional, COO fractional, but more specifically to AI, all of those things can shift your risk. And as you might go to people, as you might decide, I need a location, these are all things you're probably making business decisions without necessarily thinking about, like, what does that mean from an insurance standpoint? And so I really think that more than anything, having open conversations, consistently having someone you can just talk to about this. We can be a resource. If you have another local resource, that's fine. But every year you should be having an insurance conversation of like, am I still in the right category? Do I need to scale back? We have people that enter retirement and want to dial back even their fractional, right? Like, this was fun for 10 years, but I kind of want to start like taking a step back. All of that matters. And if you're thinking about insurance as that asset, like, that goes into the planning of your assets as well. So please keep that in mind. I think most of you probably know, even having an LLC does not protect your assets when it comes from liabilities like this. Like, if you're held at fault at something, the LLC is great, but they're still going to come back and expect, financial gain, or not financial gain, financial reimbursement for losses that may have been as a result of an action or piece of advice that you gave. All right, let me kind of pop back to the chat. If you're providing guidance for regulatory compliance, is it higher risk or lower risk, given that the client needs to be in the letter of the law, and I would start working with them when they are not? Oh, perfect. Felix is already answering. Oh, no, sorry. So Larry, I think for the advisory topics, it really does depend. If I think about like insurance advice, if I think about financial advice, like CPAs, financial professionals, things like that, the risk is kind of still a little more niched in some cases. Like, if you're giving broad stroke advice, that's one thing. But if you're giving advice specifically on an industry that is new, like AI, or there's like more risk exposure because we don't necessarily know what we don't know, there could be more risks. And so from the compliance piece, like, that part from a legal standpoint, the impact of you giving poor advice, whether it causes a legal implication or not, is kind of the same. Like, if they have to go to court because you gave them incorrect advice that put them against the law, and they have to defend themselves that like you were the one to have done that, or they have to pay fines and they're looking for you, that risk is the same if someone else gave bad investment advice and someone decided to take their, company and their, share price and invest it here and lost 2 million. Like, the 2 million's the same. I hope that's making a little bit of sense. So from like there's not necessarily more risk because it's legal. It really just gets down to like the industry that you're in, what specifically you're advising about, et cetera.
Thank you.
Of course. If you have more questions, feel free to pop them in. It looks like Felix is knocking them out. So if you are W-2 and you're rather than 1099, so in that case, ultimately the insurance policy for the company is kind of like what's taking care of it. Like, you have been hired on, you are a representative of that company. If you do something, like if you were to cause a cyber breach, it's not going to look great. I'm sure your boss isn't going to be happy with you. But generally speaking, they're not going to like be holding you liable unless it was something intentional, malicious. Like, there's always caveats, right? If they realize you were out to get them, it did something intentionally, that's different. But if it was out of a mistake or network security thing that wasn't done, essentially they're owning that and their policy does extend to you. So great questions. All right. So we kind of want to spend some time talking about single member LLCs. As we kind of frame this, and again, we think about insurance as an asset, we do want to say, like, we are not lawyers. And we certainly encourage you to talk to a lawyer when it comes to the creation of business entity. As an insurance expert, though, we do want to spend some time saying, like, again, how an LLC is not necessarily protecting you from legal ramifications of poor advice you're giving, someone getting injured, your system getting hacked, things like that. So I won't spend too much time on this because it felt like the room felt like they understood this a little bit. But let me look. Let's see. What if we create LLC but do not reside in the U.S.? Would that cause issues with insurance? So for us, we don't care where you form an LLC. You don't even have to form an LLC to have insurance or to protect your business. If you're doing business in the US, you're most likely going to need a policy that protects for that. And without knowing the scope of your business, what percentage is US versus not, there's a lot of caveats. You might even have to have several policies. You might have to have 2 separate policies, one for your domicile and one for where you do most business. But Felix has got you covered as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to add to that, I just typed it in. If you are domiciled in another country, if you buy a policy that's based in the US, so if you do have an address in the United States and you buy a policy that is a USA policy, it'll cover you depending on the carrier worldwide. So most policies that are sold today for E&O and cyber have worldwide coverage, which means that you're covered no matter where your clients are located, as long as a lawsuit is brought to a USA court or a Canadian court. So as long as a lawsuit is brought here and filed, you should be fine. But you would want to just double check if you do have existing coverage that you do have worldwide coverage for that. General liability is separate. That is usually domestic. So you wouldn't have coverage if you live, for example, in Paris, or if you live in Canada and you get a general liability policy in the USA, you would have to get foreign coverage for it to cover you where you're located, or you would have to buy a policy in your country and then have a separate policy for like your USA operations.
And again, if you have clients in other countries, it's safe to assume that they will be bringing their lawsuit to that country. So you're going to want to make sure there's like separate coverage for that, just to be clear. These are really good questions. This is really engaging. Thank you, guys. All right, so we're going to talk through some policies. Business owner policy is not one we've talked about a lot. I think for the most part, you guys probably don't have a ton of office space. Maybe you do. Maybe we're wrong on that. But for a business owner's policy, a couple of things I want to bring up. It really bundles together your business property and general liability. So you're not going to want a business owner's policy or a BOP for sakes of, you know, my words, word economy here. And a general liability, because you are essentially covering the same things. The difference between a business owner's policy is it has property protection. So outside of doing some of the advertising protection and things like that, it's protecting your business. So if you were to be manufacturing, let's say you're a fractional manufacturer, like you have machinery, it's covered. If you have an office space, it's covering walls in from that office space, possibly even more than that, depending on the contract. If you own a building that you're working out of, that's where a business owner's policy comes in. Again, my guess is that a lot of you guys wouldn't have that, but if you do have a BOP and a general liability, talk to us, because like you shouldn't. Then you're overinsured. Questions on that? Okay. I always love and imagine. I'm a storyteller at heart, so I love telling like a good story. So bear with me. So we want to talk a little bit about this. This is going to be a quiz as well. There's correct answers at the end. All right. Dave is a fractional CFO whose home office is dedicated to his business. He has a costly computer setup, an Ergo workstation, and he stores years worth of carefully filed documents and financial records in his office. One evening, a small fire breaks out. How would you reckon the office? I don't know. Maybe he left a candle on. Maybe the cat knocked it over. We can go on and on. But luckily, he has a BOP. He files a claim with his insurance company, and the expense of his lost equipment is all covered. He's able to resume work with minimum downtime and little financial setback, and no client trust is lost. Now, how would that be different if you had a GL instead of a BOP? Any takers? Any chats? Let me go to the chat. Oh, I've missed a few chats. Felix, you want to fill them in?
Yes. So for the difference between a general liability policy is it's only going to be third-party coverage. If you have a business owner's policy, even if you work from home, there's certain business owner's policies that you can cover as low as $1,000 in business personal property, which could be to cover your laptop or your computer or your desktop. And the benefit of getting the business owner's policy version of it is that you can get business interruption. So that'll cover you while you're down. So if there is a fire that wipes everything out and you're down for a month, that business interruption would reimburse you for lost income. So that's where you would benefit from getting something like that versus a general liability.
You're right. If a general liability, if this person only had a general liability, none of this stuff would be covered. And I love the business interruption note. I don't think we talk enough about that in the fractional world. at the end of the day, if something happened that stopped you from being able to do your business, and maybe that is a small fire, maybe it's a computer being damaged, or, when I think of a computer, I think it's like probably a small expense, but something bigger. That business interruption coverage could be huge. If you can't do business for a couple days, it can come in and reimburse you for like lost income while you're replacing your equipment, while you're building back up your office, things like that. For your homeowner's policy, like your homeowner's policy is not covering business assets. If it is, it's covering a very small portion. And so I think, I don't want to speak for you and your policy, but if you've got enough worthwhile that it would be really bad if you lost, it could be, client files. It could be all, a lot of different things. The BOP can really help you with keeping that income. To a medical cost, and I think that's a great question. I think that's something else that we don't talk about. We weren't going to talk a ton about here, is workers' compensation. So as a fractional anything, I was going to say CFO because that's on my screen, but as a fractional executive, one of the things that you're probably working in between is like medical coverage. And so maybe you have a spouse or partner who you have medical coverage through. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're in like a COBRA type thing. But when you think about work comp, a lot of times what we think about is a third party. So if any of you guys are advising and you're talking to a construction crew, you're like, oh, you definitely need workers' compensation, right? But BOP is not going to cover you for any kind of medical issues. Workers' compensation can. So workers' compensation, you can offer owner-only policies, means you're just covering yourself. And let's say you break your wrist goofing off and now you can't like type, you can't, use your mouse and things like that, and you're out of work for a little bit. Workers' compensation can replace your lost wages or like what you would have been making for the time that you couldn't work. And so workers' comp, I mean, yes, technically, actually, yeah, you're right. It does have to be related to, sorry, I used a bad example, sorry. But let's say like you get carpal tunnel and then you can't work for that reason. So I apologize. Then it would have,
Carpal tunnels are perfect.
yeah.
Carpal tunnel, severe sciatica, where you can't sit at your desk for a certain amount of time. So all those type of injuries that are work related, that happen because of the course of work or the type of work that you're doing physically, it would cover that. An illness as well. So if you go do visit a client in person and for whatever reason you catch some kind of illness in the location that you're located at, or you get injured on the way there, the workers' comp would cover your medical expenses in that case and your lost wages as an owner. Now, health insurance is separate. You would want to get health insurance. That's something that if you want to cover if you get the flu, that's completely separate. This is literally specifically for work-related injuries or illnesses.
Yeah. And so no, Cindy, it wouldn't be while skiing. I'm so sorry. I gave like a terrible example for that. It would be only job related things. So thank you for asking. I'm so sorry. But no, it would not be covered under business continuation. It would only be covered if you have work comp and if you were injured doing something on the job. All right, Lita. So my husband works at Microsoft. We have legal insurance. Not sure of the details. Can I use it for my S corp, or does it need to be solely in his name? It sounds like a benefits question. It sounds like your husband most likely has like a legal benefits piece. I don't know if you could use it for, oh, let's see, it looks like Lee. Okay. So I don't know if you could use it for your S corp. It would probably, I don't know if it's like for personal, like if it says like personal legal issues or business, because a lot of things they'll be very specific.
Yeah, Lido, I'm not familiar with that product because we don't sell legal insurance, but it sounds like it could be a personal one. So some companies will offer, like a legal service where you get basically a consultant that you could talk to, a legal consultant in case you run into a legal situation. But I think that would be more personal. I don't know how it would extend to coverage as on your business. So I would have to check, with that company that sold it to you to make sure what they cover and what they don't. Yeah, and then Tara just jumped in. She said, I've typically found that employee benefit policies exclude business purposes, which is what I would imagine. But again, the only way to find out for sure is just to give them a call and speak to somebody over there.
Yeah, I would assume that as well. All right. So personal umbrella policy. So your personal umbrella policy would not pay out for any kind of business exposures. And so they're going to be very particular about that when they underwrite if you were to bring a claim forward. Now you might be able to get some like riders or some specific language for business for a certain amount on some policies, but for the most part, the personal like umbrella insurance industry is like very protective of that. You would want a business umbrella. So you can get an umbrella policy for your business as well. And that would go above and beyond all the limits that we're discussing. So let's say you have an E&O policy of $1 million, a general liability of $1 million, and then an umbrella of $1 million. Now you essentially effectively have $2 million in coverage to go above and beyond the 1 million that you already represented. So whatever you have on one policy, you get $1 million above that to protect against that liability. And it would not, your personal umbrella policy, even with an LLC, the personal umbrella policy only protects your personal assets. It's not gonna, like, if you were to do something personally, if you were to be, telling your mama jokes at the bus stop with other bus stop moms or something, like that's where the personal liability policy is gonna come in. If you're in a car accident, something like that, it's not gonna do business at all. So if you get stuck with the flu, if you get sick with the flu, it falls under work comp. Technically, yes, like there's still days you have to be out of work and stuff like that. But yeah, if you were to catch an illness and like during the course of a job visiting a client's office, then it would fall under work comp. You could have lost income wages covered after a certain amount of days.
Yeah, it would have to be something that's more than just a common cold or flu, though. However, like it's something that would have to hospitalize you. So I gave an example of a strange bacterial infection that you get visiting a place of business, whether it's your client's place of business or your own. If there's some kind of outbreak where more than one person got it and it could be proven that that's where the location that the outbreak occurred, that's when the workers' comp would kick in. So if you just wake up with the flu, it's probably not going to cover those type of claims. And you probably wouldn't want it to if you're going to be down for a day or two in that scenario, because it's just going to increase your rates. So even if they do cover it, your renewal is going to be a lot higher because now you have a claim for a very small amount of money. So it might not even be worth it. So my best example is something where you're hospitalized for a few days, even a week or more,
I think
where you would want to tap into that coverage.
the hospitalization is important. So as you go through any work comp claim, like that's going to be one of the things that's that they're going to ask, that they're going to evaluate, et cetera. So I think you could still make it for the flu. It would have to be to the level of being hospitalized. And remember, you have to be down for a certain amount of days. For a lot of places, it's going to be like 2 weeks, et cetera. It's not necessarily like you're out a day.
Yeah, it wouldn't be worth it if you're down a day or two and you just miss work. Because like I said, being hospitalized means you're immobile for some extent of time and you can't get on your computer to notify your clients that you're sick. So you can't finish the project you were working on. So now they're waiting on you and they might have some kind of hardship. And then now you have a hardship because you potentially missed out on that client. They went somewhere else for help and hired another person. So at that point, you would probably want to do a workers' compensation claim. But for anything that's very minor, that's not serious, you probably could be covered technically, like under the policy definition, but it wouldn't be advisable.
It's kind of like if you've ever lost power and you have a renter's policy or a homeowner's policy, and let's say you lose power for like 2 days, you can make a claim and get everything in a refrigerator covered, right? So you'd be like, oh, and I have a neighbor who went through this. That's why this is a very like tangible example. You could technically file a claim with your insurance company, your homeowners or renters, and they would pay for whatever you value all the materials in your refrigerator. So if you like had a picture of everything that was spoiled, but then your rates are going to go up. And it's like, was that really worth it in the long run? Because now you're paying higher rates for 3 to 5 years, possibly even the rest of your life, just to have some stuff in your refrigerator covered when you haven't used that dressing in like 2 years anyway, Let's be real. You have dressing from in there from like 2 years ago. All right. When applying for LLCs, let me do like a time check. Okay, so we're running low on time. So I'm gonna prioritize answering your questions. Is everything okay with that versus kind of going through? And you can certainly look through the presentation and reach out if you have questions. Felix and I's contact information's on the last page. Feel free to reach out to us. You have your LLC in Wyoming, residences in other states. Depending on the policy that you're talking about, like work comp is like, where are you working? Like, where is the business being done? When it comes to professional liability, errors and omissions on GL, again, it's kind of that global policy. And so it's more about like, as long as you're advising, you're good. So for this part, we'd be like, where are you doing most of your business? What is the address that you're using to get mail, like for your business, things like that. But you would have coverage regardless. But again, that's policy specific. Like a business owner's policy is covering property. It's going to know where's the property located. Work comp is like, where are you working? And if you're working in multiple states, all of those have to be listed in some policies. How would we prove this? I'm guessing you're talking about the sickness piece. You know, at the end of the day, I think you would just have to like state the facts and say like, I was well, I went to this meeting, 24 hours later, this, you know, people were sneezing at the meeting, 24 hours later, this happened. I was hospitalized for 4 weeks. You know, I think it would literally just be going through that. And the claims people would just be asking questions and probably
Exactly.
interviewing them. Yeah.
Yeah, the claims people would tell you, you would call in to open a claim and they'll guide you. They'll ask you a certain amount, like certain questions, you'll give your statement, and then they'll pretty much tell you right away if you'll have coverage or not. If it's some kind of gray area, which is something more serious where they're probably going to have to pay up to your policy limits, like let's say you have $1 million policy and you know you want to cover 800,000 in medical expenses, then that could take longer. But for the scenario that you're giving, they would probably let you know on that same phone call if it'll cover you or not, and what you need to do if you wanted to cover you if they don't have enough information.
Yep. I would also say for the car accident piece, if you are driving your car more for business than personal, that's a separate conversation. Some policies you can do like a business car, commercial vehicle, commercial auto rider. Sometimes depending on how you're using it, you really might want an actual commercial auto policy for that. Like, are you taking clients? Are you this? And so I would just be mindful about that piece as well. But Felix,
Yeah,
comp.
yeah, Judith. So Judith, if you were to get in a car accident while you're driving to visit a client, it would fall under the workers' comp. The professional liability would be for your actual services. So what services you're providing, if you're negligent or if you make a mistake or cause them to have a financial hardship, meaning your customer, that's your errors and omissions or professional liability, which is the same thing, different definition. Some companies will call it professional liability, some call it errors and omissions, same coverage. But the work comp is the one that would cover you in that scenario for your injuries. They won't cover your car because your car insurance would have to cover that,
Yep.
but they will cover your injuries specifically.
And then just to note as well, depending on who you have your auto for, just make sure that your personal homeowners, your personal auto carrier, they understand how you're using your vehicle. Because if you're in an accident and they're like, what were you doing? I was on my way to see a client. The claims representative at this point is going to look and see if any, you know, do you have business use in your policy? Is that something they knew
Yes.
about? And they could also deny the claim and say, well, we didn't know. We thought you were just like driving your vehicle to the grocery store. We didn't know you were driving it for business. Therefore, we could deny the claim. But again, as long as you're kind of telling, if you're upfront about how you're using things, your insurance agent can advise you. And there's usually, depending on how much, like no cost, no care. It's just like putting a rider or a note on it in some cases. So all really good questions.
Exactly. Yeah, so just make sure it's literally called business use. It's an endorsement that you can add to your personal auto. Real estate agents will have business use. Gardeners that might have just one truck that they use themselves and drive themselves will have those type of riders. Consultants that travel for work a lot, they travel to clients or to find clients.
Notaries and stuff.
Yeah, notaries, they all have that business use. It's pretty universally accepted with all carriers. I don't think if you asked for it, they would say no or non-renew your policy. It's pretty available if you ask for it.
Yep. But if you don't have it and then a claim happens, then the carrier could have the right to deny that
Could.
claim if they wanted to.
Yeah, which if you don't know, call your agent, whoever you have your auto insurance with, if it's State Farm, Allstate, Progressive, whoever, and just ask and say, do I have business use because I use my car to travel from work site to work site? Like it's not a straight, back and forth office visit. So that way they know.
Yep. And Larry, Karina already has it. And so I think she's going to share the recording as well as the deck afterward. I got a thumbs up.
And then if anybody,
this is my favorite webinar. Yeah, you guys are asking fantastic questions.
Yeah, great questions. They're really good questions. If you do want to get a quote 24/7, you can visit our website at coverhound.com and you can get quotes for all these products that we discussed. If you prefer to have a hands-on approach, we do have licensed advisors under my team that can assist you and guide you just like I did with the type of questions you're asking. But as always, no matter where you go, always ask questions. If you have a concern, if you have a specific example, is this covered, is this not covered? Licensed agents are there for this exact reason. So make sure you ask away.
Yep. No one's going to advocate for you like you will. So make sure you're asking questions and taking care of yourselves.
Yep.
was a pleasure. If y'all need us, reach out. Again, contact information, email, website, all of that's going to be at the last page of the deck. And this has been phenomenal. Thank you all for being such a great and engaging group.
Thank you, Caitlin and Felix. Thank you, everyone,
You're
for being
welcome.
here. And yes, this will be uploaded both to Slack for an updates and in the Coda Resource Hub either later today or tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Bye,
the rest.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.